When I was financially strapped, I worked the night shift at a gas station. For a few months, I was on the night shift. This individual first started showing up around 2 a.m. every night sometime in my second or third month here. About 6 feet tall with long, stringy hair, he was a regular customer who always bought a tall boy before leaving. Time passed, and eventually, he asked what my name was. After I told him my name, he kept repeating, "Rob, I like that," to himself. He took a sip from the tall boy he had just purchased and then walked out of the store, muttering to no one in particular. He was visibly inebriated on this particular evening. I wondered if he had been drinking and driving on every one of his previous visits to the shop. I waited until he was out of sight before leaving the gas station. That makes sense, as I recall him never filling up. When he came in, he only ever bought liquor. After that, I saw him nearly every night. For a while, he would come in on some nights visibly more inebriated than others, and he would sometimes just sit for a while with his back against one of the shelves. He always said, "Hey, Rob," whenever he saw me. He had a tall boy and sat staring at a wall one night while leaning on a shelf and drinking it. Finally, I inquired as to what his name was. After staring at me for what seemed like an eternity, he finally said, "Bob." Now, Bob has always struck me as an easy alias. I couldn't help but wonder if Bob came to mind for him because of the similarity between our names, but I went with it anyway. When I asked him, "So, Bob, where do you work?" his loud laughter took me by surprise. He claimed he was unemployed because the government treated him unfairly. I got the impression he'd been drinking again. He gave me an angry look but then said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I had no idea what he meant by that, but he left the store shortly after. It had been some time before I saw him again. For a regular like him, that's a long time, but I'd estimate at least a week passed. Bob has always given off an odd, slightly creepy vibe to me. I assumed he was frequently inebriated, but something about his life seemed off. Well, on one particularly stormy night, when business was slower than usual, probably due to the weather, I heard the front door ding as a customer walked in. I swore in my head that it was Bob before I even looked, and when I did, I couldn't believe it was him. But this Bob was much more terrifying than the original. He had gotten drenched. Neither an umbrella nor a raincoat could be seen on him. He was dressed casually in a dark shirt and jeans. He stood dripping wet by the door, staring blankly in the direction of the wall. He appeared angry, but his eyes betrayed the fact that his thoughts were racing in another direction. His expressionless stare as he stood there in the rain gave me the creeps. I asked Bob, "Are you all right?" but he didn't respond. When I asked him what he had done wrong, he froze and said, "I did something really bad." He looked at me and said, "I need somewhere to hide," and then he walked past me at the register and down the short hallway to the restrooms. After he went through the opening in the wall, I heard a door close. I'd reached a new level of discomfort around Bob. There was always something off about him when he came into the store, but tonight it seemed particularly pronounced. His "I did something really bad" remark added to the creepiness of his zombie-like appearance. Bob remained in there for a while and never emerged. Again, I assumed he was too drunk to care and had passed out or thrown up. I was hesitant to get involved either way. The next thing I remember, the electricity had gone out, and the store was pitch black. During a severe storm, I found myself in a gas station with an unhinged drunk man. I made my way to the back of the store, past the inventory storage and the panel board, using the flashlight from behind the counter. The back entrance was on the same short corridor as the stalls. Both stall doors I passed on my way to the shower were propped open, and I didn't see Bob in either of them. I exited via the rear door. I started walking over to the panel board, but I paused when I heard a faint drip and the squeaking of wet shoes. My stomach sank and my heart sank with it. A trembling Bob came out of my frightened lips. Sounds of squeaking came from my left. When I shone the light in there, I saw Bob staring at me with wide eyes. He lunged at me, clawing at my back and yelling, "I'm going to kill you." I pushed him off of me. I exited to the front of the store and made a break for it. Not even close. I quickly threw on my raincoat and made my way to the car. While waiting for an operator to answer my 911 call, I sat in my car. I stayed on the line with her and was soon accompanied inside by 2 police officers. Bob was still cowering in the back room like a crazed animal. His eyes were enormous. Until then, I hadn't seen it. He must have been high. After I reported that he lunged at me, threatened to kill me, and claimed he had done something terrible earlier, the police took him to the station. After knowing this Bob guy for over a month, I finally learned that his real name was Martin. He had killed his ex-wife by beating her to death. He may have entered the station on the same night it occurred. To make a long story short, I swore off working night shifts and other jobs forever after that night. For no particular reason. I have logged many hours behind the wheel at night. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I had a group of friends with whom I would regularly stay out until absurd hours. You could say we were on the losing end of things. It was cool in our heads to stay out every weekend until 5 a.m., chatting in parks and parking lots. In retrospect, it was a pointless endeavor. For this reason, though, I've logged more than my share of nighttime miles on the road. That's when the roads are most likely to be populated by drunks and crazies. It was late on a Saturday or Sunday night, probably around 4 a.m. I needed to get back to my house. After dropping off my friend at their house near the park where we were hanging out, I had to stop for gas before heading home. I preferred filling up at night when there were fewer vehicles around. Not too far from my childhood home, I pulled into one of my go-to gas stations. A short man in a hoodie walked past me as I was heading toward the building to make my payment. As I passed him, he halted what he was doing and gave me the cold shoulder. As I walked on, I muttered, "What?" He said nothing, so I assumed he was just another chance encounter and kept walking. While I was inside the station, I bought a lottery ticket and paid the gas attendant. When I got back outside, I began to refuel. As I had anticipated, the place was deserted at this hour. After I finished, I got back in my car and drove off. When I was about halfway there, I became aware of a noise at the back of the car. I turned around and saw a pair of eyes staring back at me from the back seat. I let out a yell that must have nearly ruptured my lungs. I screeched to a halt and yelled, "Get out," as I recognized the man as the gas station attendant. Knowing that at least a couple of neighbors would hear my cries for assistance, I threw open my doors and began screaming. The lights on the porches of a few houses came on, and I could make out the movement of open doors. Upon exiting my vehicle, the man remarked, "I could have slit your throat," drawing the attention of those still inside their homes. Down the street, he fled in haste. To be clear, I did not give chase. When some bystanders asked how I was doing, I disclosed the presence of the mysterious passenger in my car. The man had already disappeared. I didn't feel like getting in my car and going after someone who could be dangerous. I thanked those who had helped and continued on my way, taking care not to run into him again. I've never been so terrified in all my years. The Atlanta area experienced this in the 1960s. I was probably around 9 years old at the time. My father was a school teacher, and his classroom was located in a distant Atlanta suburb. I shared a commute with him because I attended the same school where he taught. But every day, we had to get up shockingly early and leave before dawn. Several times a week in the morning, we would stop at a local gas station to refuel. We frequently arrived shortly after the station opened, making us the first car there. Full service was the norm back then. An attendant would fill your gas tank, clean your windows, and do other services at a nearby booth. His pockets were always stuffed with bills, and he wore a coin counter around his waist. There were teeny washrooms hidden behind the pumps. As it was a long drive, I used to take advantage of our morning stops there to use the restroom. We arrived at the station early one morning, and once again, it was deserted. There wasn't a sound to be heard, not even from the passing cars. There was nobody in the booth and no one else in sight at the station. My dad tried to get someone's attention by blasting the horn on the car a few times, but no one came. We speculated on possible causes of the issue. The attendant may be in the restroom, as my father initially hypothesized. But when he still didn't show up, my dad suggested that perhaps the attendant had car trouble and was late for work. We waited for what felt like an eternity. Nobody else's vehicle arrived. I needed to use the restroom, and reached for the car door handle, but my dad said we had to keep going and that I could get out at the next station. Leaving with our heads spinning, we went our separate ways. A day or two later, while watching him read the local paper, I overheard my father let out a loud exclamation. After reading a small article, he told my mother and me that a gas station attendant's body had been found stuffed into the men's restroom, where he had suffered multiple stab wounds. It was the regular stop for us. According to the article, robbery appeared to be the driving force because no cash or coins were left behind. The early morning total probably wasn't very high. The amount stolen was not specified in the article, but that didn't stop the murderer. I often think about what my reaction would have been if, at that age, I had insisted on using the restroom there and opened the door to find the murdered attendant inside. We avoided that gas station like the plague. I was 25 years old at the time. Due to my work schedule, I had to make the trip from northern to southern Texas at night. Most of the trip was spent on Route 281, and it was a simple, straight drive given the late hour. The key was to force myself to stay awake. Getting on the road so soon after finishing work was a real challenge for me. To keep going, I kept stopping at random gas stations for coffee. It was around the third time I'd felt sleepiness creep in, and I also needed to refuel. I found the first gas station I came to on the lonely back roads and pulled in. It was a gas station, but I can't recall whether it was a Sunoco or a Shell. The parking lot only held one other vehicle. After parking next to a pump, I entered the building. I saw the cashier and then a man pacing up and down the aisles, so two people were working there. I walked over to the coffee pot and poured a cup for myself. That pacing guy just warned me, "Careful, it's hot," and then he left. It was an odd way to try to strike up a conversation, and I politely declined. I simply wasn't in the mood. Without a word, I went to the register to buy the coffee and some gas. As I paid, a man behind me said, "I like that top," to which I replied, "Thank you," only loudly enough for him to hear. When he asked where I was going so late at night, I was so irritated that I demanded he leave me alone. The cashier was a Hispanic man in his 40s. I had no idea how much English he knew, or if he was even trying to make sense of what was going on in front of him. However, he was a shorter, smaller man, and was therefore unlikely to intervene. The man behind me said, "Calm down," when I asked him to please stop talking to me. Without another word, I walked out of the store into my waiting car. A few seconds after I left the store, I heard the door open once more. Now I was standing next to my car getting gas. My car's gas tank began to fill up. On the concrete outside of where the pumps were, I heard his feet suddenly stop. Nobody walked any further. When I looked up, he was standing on the other side of the pump from where I was working. He was just standing there, staring at me. There wasn't even a car for him to fill up, so he wasn't getting gas. The pepper spray in my car's center console started to look like a good idea. When he asked, "Are you alone?" the man knew he was in a dire situation. When she asked if my boyfriend was inside, I said, "No, he's in the car," then opened the door and snatched the pepper spray from the dashboard. I took it and held it by my side as though I were still thinking about the gas pump. The man appeared to be slowly making his way around the gas pump to join me. "No one else was in the car," he said. The man laughed as I pointed the pepper spray at his face, and he quickly retreated. According to him, all he wanted to do was strike up a chat. He was backing away from me while staring straight at me. I was almost finished filling up the tank. After that, I heard and felt a clang. My tank was full, so the gas pump turned off. To get the change for about $6, I had to go back inside. This man was blocking my path to the store. I had to settle on one option. I decided to go and get some cash. My arm was still raised, and the pepper spray can was still pointed in his direction. He kept moving away from her while laughing. I waited until I was out of his sight before entering the store and asking the cashier for spare change. I tried to explain to the cashier that the customer was making me feel unsafe, but he didn't seem to grasp my point. After I paid and got my change, I walked out the glass door and surveyed the parking lot. That man wasn't among the people I spotted. I exited the store and went to the sidewalk. I just stood there on the narrow sidewalk, taking everything in. The man had disappeared from view, indicating that he had gone into deep concealment. A pickup truck eventually arrived in the parking lot and parked next to one of the gas station's pumps. I approached a burly, bearded man who had just emerged and asked for assistance. I wanted to make sure no one was lurking behind my car, so I asked him to look. He didn't understand, but he helped me out anyway. When he reached the other side of my car, he yelled, "What are you doing?" And the suspicious man quickly disappeared from behind my vehicle. He took off, running into the nighttime area around the gas station. That meant a lot, and then in his heavy southern drawl, he cautioned, "Be careful out there." I hastily drove away from that parking lot and resumed my journey. I was disturbed by the fact that the creepy man was waiting to pounce the moment I unlocked the car doors. My heart was still racing from the encounter, but I kept driving. Both my adrenaline and my lingering fear were keeping me up at night. I couldn't wait to get out of that gas station and away from that strange man. I arrived at my destination without any further drama occurring during the rest of the drive. When I think back to that night, I feel apprehensive about the interaction. The man's strange behavior was both disturbing and potentially dangerous. It served as a cautionary tale about the value of staying alert, especially in new environments. Even as I drove on through the night, I couldn't shake the sensation of helplessness I'd experienced at that moment. It was a sobering reminder that peril could be hiding anywhere, even in everyday activities. A stranger's helpful actions at the gas station averted a potentially dangerous situation, so I'm very appreciative of him. When I finally reached my destination, I sat down for a moment to collect my thoughts and assess the situation. Although I was terrified by the experience, I learned an important lesson about following my gut and being ready to defend myself if necessary. After that, I was much more careful about pulling over in random areas during my late-night drives. I told this story to everyone I knew, not only as a warning about the dangers of traveling alone, but also to emphasize the value of keeping one's wits about oneself at all times. It served as a sobering reminder that threats can materialize out of nowhere, but that being alert and well-prepared can make all the difference in the world.